Arkham Knight is the latest entry into the Arkham series, and since some time has passed since its release, I think I can finally critique it as a flawed product without the massive backlash. I want to emphasize that I did in fact enjoy the game, and plan on playing through it again. But having spent some time with it, I'm pretty sure this will not be remembered as fondly as the first two Arkham games. Some of the problems I will be discussing were present in the older games as well, but not to the same degree. I want to dive right into the critique because I'm not very good at segues. One of my biggest problems with the game is that it constantly interrupts you with messages from characters, and it feels like the game wants you to play it as a movie, not realizing it should have systemized it so it could be interactive. Remember the audio logs from Bioshock? Why not do something like that, where I can choose whether or not to answer calls from people, and I can listen to them without it breaking the flow of gameplay? Some people will say it's because the story wouldn't work if you can control what you wanted to see of it, but guess what? You have to make the story flow with the mechanics and themes of the game. Demon's Souls had this really down, where the game is challenging and understanding the story is challenging as well. Arkham Knight seems to think the gameplay is just a distraction, something to do until we see the next cutscene, which I hated. I loved the previous games so much because they made me feel like Batman. Everything was skippable and there wasn't any filler. I remember skipping all the story and still feeling the story just through the environments. The gangs in the city change locations as the gang wars progress, and then the militia enters the fight along with helicopters, and at one point they begin to bomb the place. In Arkham Asylum, they designed the areas to match what you should be feeling. When they wanted you to feel defeated because something bad is happening, they had you play Predator missions, using claustrophobic environments to match the theme. When they wanted you to feel empowered because Batman is angry, they have you fighting a group of unarmed enemies. Arkham Knight throws Predator missions into wide open areas, and very rarely does it feel like what I'm playing matches the story. That is to say, the part of my brain that feels Batman's pain when he is about to sacrifice himself to reduce the blast radius isn't the same part of my brain that I used to play the game. In the story, Batman is giving his life as Alfred pleads with him to flee, but all I'm doing is moving slowly so that I don't blow up the bombs. Why? They've artificially hampered my progress in order for them to be able to shove a story down my throat. Why not make me do something that feels like sacrificing myself? Like having me in a room of enemies who want to beat me up, and make the challenge to not fight. I know it doesn't exactly match the story, but it's a much better way to make me feel sacrifice. And make them weak enemies, so I know I could easily take them out. Another point I didn't like, and this is something I really dreaded bringing up. Mark Hamill returns as the Joker. When I saw him pop up on screen and start talking, I was a little shocked. I thought for a moment that they had pulled a Metal Gear Solid 2 on me, because all the advertising that we had seen for the game literally took place in the first 2 hours or so. I thought, damn, they got me. They pulled the rug from under my feet, because I had been paying so much attention to the marketing, and I heard them hammer in the point on and on about how Scarecrow was now the villain. And honestly, I think the Joker made the game weaker. And I also feel like he wasn't actually planned. It's almost like the game was delayed a month so they could just splice him in. Think about how smart the previous 2 games had been about how they used him. You almost never shared a room with him, but you could constantly hear his voice. They made his henchmen look like clowns and his areas look like carnivals in order to give him presence. But in this game, he just pops up in and out of view and breaks the flow of the story. I'm supposed to believe his blood will make Batman insane, and that because he and Batman had such a strong relationship, Batman recreated him in his mind, and now Batman has to race against the clock or he'll become the next Joker? Come on. They had a reason for you to hurry. Oracle was kidnapped. That creates a story and gameplay reason for you to care, because you no longer have the intel she provided. But that part of the story is completely ignored in favor of the fear that Batman will turn into the Joker. That part is so boring, and I know I'm in the minority on this one, but couldn't he just stay dead? I really wish they could have just given us a decent Scarecrow story. I've heard my friends talk about how his presence adds to the game, but I think you could cut him out and end up with a stronger game. In the first one, he was the villain. The Joker had manipulated the environment to his control and he was using it to test Batman. That works. In Arkham City, Hugo Strange is going to kill all the criminals in Gotham, but Batman also has to deal with the Joker, who is dying and infected Batman with his disease in order to make him cure them both. That works. Remember how Batman stopped Hugo Strange before he confronted the Joker? That was a really good moment. Batman wants to save Talia, but Alfred forces him to stop Strange. In that moment, Alfred reminds Bruce of what he stands for, that he must stop Strange before he can save himself. I really felt that moment because I was aware of how human Bruce was. He wanted to save himself, but he told Alfred that he had to save Talia because he couldn't look weak. But Alfred isn't having any of that, and he reminds him of who he is. I really like this moment because they used Batman's strengths to emphasize his weakness. You don't often see that kind of stuff, and especially not in video games. But when Batman stops Strange, he immediately goes for the Joker, and in the end, the Joker dies. That game really nailed the essentials of who Batman is, arguably better than Arkham Asylum. You can really feel how scared Batman is in those final moments and really admire how he still keeps up the facade. Then in Arkham Knight, you have the Scarecrow who wants to kill Batman, and he's brought in an enemy who seemingly knows everything about Batman. I was disappointed that it didn't have it be an original character because I would have been very interested in an enemy who knew how scared Batman was in the end of the last one. An enemy who could use that. But that being said, you have a great setup here. Scarecrow serves as a parallel to Hugo Strange, but he actually just wants to kill Batman. He isn't as misguided as Strange, he just wants to kill the guy. But first, he wants him to show fear. I thought this was where the Arkham Knight would come in. I thought he would be someone who could replicate how desperate Batman was in the end of the last one. But having it be Jason Todd also works, because it's someone Batman has to defeat outside of battle. Batman can't fight the Arkham Knight because the Arkham Knight wants to fight Batman. I thought this was a really interesting setup. Even though it wasn't what I wanted, I thought the Arkham Knight and Scarecrow duo really had a lot of potential in a Batman story. But then they throw in this bigger plot about how Batman is going to become the next Joker, and all of a sudden Scarecrow and the Arkham Knight seem like small fries. The story abandons them in order to explain how Batman is changing, and in the end they throw you into first person mode straight inside Joker's head, inside Batman's head, and they have you playing the most scripted sequence in a video game this side of Call of Duty. I mean, my God, what happened? These guys gave us two games that really delved into Batman as a character, and in the end they decided to play it safe with a plot that has no place in this series? Am I the only one who feels like this game isn't following the rules they established in the earlier ones? And what really frightens me is that they obviously forced WB Montreal to make Arkham Origins so bland. So much of that game is present in this one. You have outdoors Predator missions, you have a new Batsuit, you have a less subdued Batman, you have a boring Joker mission. And I want to go into the backstory a little before I go on further. Because the writer of the first two games did not return for Origins, and did not return for Knight either. In the end of Arkham City, he set up Hush as a potential villain, and Harley Quinn was pregnant. He also set up Azrael's premonition and the Scarecrow's return. There was even a part where we saw Killer Croc, but I think Rocksteady got full of themselves and decided that they could make a great Batman game without him. So they released a DLC in where they removed the pregnancy and went to work on the next game. I kinda get the feeling that the departure wasn't very pleasant because the changes between Night and City are so great that they had to force out a prequel to softly reset the rules of the world. Bottom line, the story is such a letdown and the characters are done such injustice. This is the Batman who conquered Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. And after the end of Arkham City, you would assume he would have some reservations about what he was doing. But that stuff never gets addressed. He almost died from a disease in the last one. But here he isn't even trying to cure himself. He tries to keep its secrets from his friends. Why? This is a Batman who has learned the hard way that you need people to rely on, and that there are people who rely on him, but he decides to just keep his illness a secret? I'm not even so upset at that, because you could argue that when the Joker died, he felt how weak he was and realized how fragile he was, so he doesn't want to endanger the people around him or something like that. I'm upset because they never addressed this, because they didn't think that that mattered. They just wanted to make a fun game, even though they betrayed the character they set up in the last one. Another point I want to bring up, the Batmobile. The Batmobile is kind of an anomaly. Some people love it, others hate it. Me? Well, while I agree that it is a fine addition, my feeling is that it's just so out of place. I mean, this is a Batman who's been characterized by slowly crawling through vents and taking out enemies one by one, and suddenly he's driving a tank? But then again, this Batman has been thrown into rooms of enemies before, and he's been shown to be a dangerous individual. So on that side, I think it doesn't feel out of character to use the car. But I don't feel like Batman when I'm shooting down drones. Even though they aren't humans, I still feel like it's out of place. But then this is a Batman in Gotham. He isn't restricted to materials like in the previous entries. In this game, he has his vast arsenal. I think my problem with the car is just that it feels out of place. Imagine if this car was in Arkham City. It just really wouldn't meld well together. Especially since gliding, and it's in this game too, gliding is faster and more practical as a means of travel. I've always felt like the Batmobile was just a means of getting around long distance, but in this game they really want you to use it all the time. I find it kinda weird that the game forces me to clear the street of drones to make it safe for me to drive, when the problem is I never wanted to drive the car. I think they should have made the Arkham Knight adjust his army to how you play. That way they could have slowed down the gameplay, while still keeping you engaged. Imagine this. Imagine he has spotters on rooftops and cameras in the city. And if they saw you flying over a certain building a lot, they would put snipers on that building. But if you drove a lot on a certain street, they would place mines or drones on that street to ambush you. That way they could have characterized the Arkham Knight with gameplay, and could have made the game feel less forced, because you were never forced to take out the drones or snipers, but the option would exist. That could also give you some strategic option as Batman. And they could have made you want to stealth your way up a giant building to take out snipers. You could even start having fun with them by feeding them weird info and randomizing your travel. They could also have given you the option to mess with the info they gave to the Arkham Knight. That would give the world depth, while also giving more characterization to the Arkham Knight and the city, but most importantly Batman. On the whole, I don't think I hate the addition of the Batmobile, but it feels like they added it in without really thinking about how they could benefit from the diverse playstyles it offered. Guess I can't bring myself to hate it, but I really wish they had done more with it. I also wish they hadn't given it a specific button, especially since I really don't want to drive it. Now, another point I want to bring up. You can't really hate a game unless you love something about it, right? The mission setup is brilliant. I know this video is a critique of the game, but I think this is a really good add-on to the Arkham games. I loved chasing cars to fight penguins, gun smugglers with Nightwing or whatever, and I loved tracing the serial killer and Man-Bat. I also really liked how they revamped the mission system. I know it doesn't feel very Batman-y to pick and choose what you want to do, but I still like how they set it up. Now, here's something else I want to bring up, and this is just a personal thing. I can't fault the game for this, but I really wanted this in the game. I wanted a boss battle with Superman in the vein of Mr. Freeze, only I wanted it to take place outside. Imagine using the car for a takedown and then having to zip through the city to reach him. Imagine how cool it would have been if you could set up turrets and traps throughout the city. I know it might not have flowed into the narrative, but the narrative doesn't flow well anyway. Why not throw this in there? I know this isn't really a strong critique, but I was very disappointed in the end when this didn't happen. Another point here. I was also very disappointed with Hush. I really thought he was gonna play some kind of part in this game. Imagine how much more sense it would have made if he had been the Arkham Knight. You could explain how he used Wayne Tech to fight Batman because he had taken on Wayne's identity, and how he was the one who fixed up Scarecrow after his skirmish with Killer Croc. They might have had to redesign his origin for the game to fit better, but I would have welcomed it. I know Hush is a loved character and he is actually my favorite Batman villain, but his origin really depends on comic book logic to work. Get this. He wanted to be rich, so he killed his parents, but his mother survived, so he had to live with her, and he became jealous of Bruce when the Waynes died, so he decided to take his revenge on Bruce, because Bruce's dad saved his mom, and also he knows who Batman is. What? Having read Hush and Heart of Hush, two great reads by the way, I really recommend them. But having read both of them, I can honestly say that he could benefit from a redesign, like what they did with Mr. Freeze in the animated series. And remember, he is my favorite Batman villain. I just kind of wish could redesign him. They could have even tied him to the series, because you see his name on a, what was it, like a billboard? No, not billboard. On a tablet in Arkham Asylum. He could have an origin similar to the Great White Shark, or you could have him killing inmates of the facility. You could also just have him recreating the Titan formula or something. I just really wished he could have done something, because his side mission in Arkham City was by far my favorite side mission in that game, and possibly my favorite part of the game. But that's really just nitpicking, really, because I don't know, he's just a character I really wanted to see something from, and he was just a big letdown in this game. Now, I know I haven't really gone into everything I wanted to, but I have a limited schedule to do these videos on. So I want to end this critique by stating that I don't feel like Arkham Knight belongs in the same universe as the first two games. In Arkham Asylum, you have a much slower Batman, who spends much of his time solving puzzles and doing detective-y things. In the second one, you have him racing against the clock to find a cure for a deathly illness he's been injected with, but the designers went out of their way to make him feel like the same character. In Arkham Origins, he's replaced with a brooding guy who displays none of the characteristics he had in the first two games. But since that was a prequel, I have to kind of concede that it was in fact a not bad representation of the character. But now that you have the same guy riding through a city in a tank, blowing up drones, and imprisoning his teammates instead of accepting their help, I think the worst part of this is that Rocksteady obviously forced WB Montreal into making their game so subpar, and clearly didn't give them any creative control. They wanted a soft reboot so that they could pump out their lackluster Batman game. So in summary, Arkham Knight, pretty good game, but pretty good doesn't do it when you're comparing yourself to the two best Batman games of all time.